Welcome, welcome, welcome. How is everybody? We are back for some more of day 6, the Chandler Halderson trial. So far, it's day 6, part 2. So far, we've listened to them talk about a video, the neighbor that smelled somebody barbecuing. Spoiler, it was Chandler burning his mom and dad in the fireplace. We have seen the neighbor's video of the flickering lights, which are said to be said fireplace burning dear old mom and dad. We listened to a lady from the Quick Trip who brought in video from her store of Chandler buying 2 10-pound bags of ice, which they conclude was used to keep the unburnable parts on ice. Then there was another video that was brought in of Chandler buying a tarp that was later found at the crime scene with blood and DNA from mom or dad. I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember. Then I forget what this other lady was. She had some evidence and things. But if you go back and you watch it, you'll see. Anyway, again, this is welcome to Rush to Judgment with Jessica. I'm Jessica. Just in case you haven't watched any of the recent videos, that's who it is. I'm just sitting here giving my little thoughts and a little commentary on some videos. Don't have any legal expertise to go along with it. Just some questions that any normal person might have. Just some comments that anybody might have. So, feel free to chime in with a comment, a question, comment, concern, thoughts, how you feel, what you think. I respond. Channel's not that big yet, so, I'll respond. Let's have a conversation. Let's have a chat. So, anyway, that's what I do this for, because, I don't have a lot of people that want to talk about these things in my close-knit circle, but I find them interesting, so I like to talk about them. And, the voices in my head only talk so much. So, there's that. But anyway, let's go ahead and get back to this. And we will start it back up. Volume is up.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to ask if you would feel comfortable and believe you could safely and responsibly testify without a mask. That would be the preference if you're able to do that.
I would prefer to keep my mask on.
Very good. Then make sure, as it is now, that the microphone is very close to
yeah.
you. I understand.
I could've called that
understood the title used in calling you that you work in healthcare, or have some relation to that industry. So as long as the jury can hear you, that'll be fine. Thank
That is
you.
correct, Your Honor.
Go right ahead.
Good afternoon. If you could please state both your first and last name and spell both for the record, please.
My first name is Corey, C-O-R-I. My last name is Breslauer, B-R-E-S-L-A-U-E-R.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a deputy
Lower.
medical examiner at the Dane County Medical Examiner's Office.
And that means you're an MD?
That is correct.
And you obviously went through some substantial training in order to become a deputy medical examiner.
That is correct.
I'm going to approach you now with Exhibit 363.
Social distancing, keep your distance. She doesn't like that.
Marked as Exhibit 363. Is this your curriculum detail?
This is.
At this point, I would move Exhibit 363 into evidence.
No objection.
It is received.
So, doctor, where did you go to medical school?
I went to medical school at the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Phoenix, Arizona.
And then did you do a
So
residency?
then you should know
I
that
did a
that mask
residency in anatomic and clinical
is
pathology at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill.
doing what?
And what is pathology?
Pathology is a study of medicine that basically covers the effects of injury and disease on the body.
And are you board certified in any area?
I am board certified in anatomic pathology and in forensic pathology.
Now, what does it mean to be board certified?
Board certification means that I underwent an approved training program in the field that I'm certified in, and then I took a qualifying exam following that training and passed that exam.
And these are pretty extensive,
Fantastic.
several day-long exams.
That is correct.
And have you worked as a medical examiner at any location outside of the Dane County office?
I worked as a local medical examiner at the North Carolina office of the chief medical examiner in Raleigh, North Carolina.
And many careers like teachers, lawyers have to go through continuing education. Is that something that doctors also have to go through?
Yes, it is.
And so you've attended trainings throughout your career as well.
Yes, the American Board of Pathology requires that I maintain my certification.
And you got involved in this investigation on July 8th of 2021, is that correct?
I believe so. I don't have my report in front of
Okay,
me.
well, fair enough. That's exactly what I was getting to. And you did write an official report in this case, is that fair?
I did.
And there was a typo in your first report, so you wrote, there's an amended report that basically eliminates one word.
The amended report reflects a correction of one typographical error.
I'm going to show you what has been
I'm still here.
marked
Just gonna try some.
as Exhibit 364. Is this your amended report in this case?
This is my amended report with the triage notes from our office attached to the front.
And we will get Exhibit 364 into evidence at this time.
No objection.
It is received.
And also in preparation for testifying, as a team, we put together a PowerPoint, which I'm going to present in booklet form because this is the feature of the photos. But is that true?
Yes.
And that is marked as Exhibit 366. And I just ask that you page through Exhibit 366 and make sure that that is the presentation that was put together.
This is the presentation. That is correct.
At this time, I would move Exhibit 366 into evidence, and I also have 365, which is additional copies.
No
Any-
objection.
Or both are accepted into evidence.
And Doctor, throughout the questioning, obviously I'm going to have you looking at Exhibit 366, but if you also need to look at your report 364, that is fine. Just maybe note on the record when you were doing so and what pages.
Yes.
Just so we have a complete record.
As the booklets are being distributed to the jury, I'll remind you that you should only turn pages when the witness is discussing the next page within the pamphlet. Obviously, you can turn back at any point. And again, we will advise you that observing these images is an important role as a juror, but studying these images is up to you personally as to the necessity that you feel to do so during the course of the testimony. Go ahead.
And Doctor, obviously you've worked as a medical examiner in various roles for several years, but is it fair to say you've performed hundreds of autopsies?
Yes, that is fair.
Okay. Obviously you don't remember them all individually, thus you write reports.
That's correct.
Okay. So anytime you need to refer to your report, that is just fine. So how did you become involved in this case? Did you actually go to the scene on Erlewine Road where the torso was found?
I did go to the scene where the torso was found. The cases are brought to the office's attention by contacting our office. They first get triaged through our investigators who gather initial information, after which we are made aware of the scene, the suspicious nature, whether or not our presence is requested. I was notified that there was a scene, potentially suspicious scene, that my presence was requested at, and I then arrived at the scene with the investigator.
And why do medical examiners go to scenes?
The medical examiners goes to scenes because there is information that we can gather, circumstantial information based off of the position of the body, the environment that the body is found, and because my specialty is assessing the circumstances and the injuries that are found on the body, I'm able to assimilate all of that information.
So what did you do when you went to the Erlewine Road address? What did you just look around, take pictures, something else?
Once the scene was assessed to be safe for us to enter, we approached where the body was located. We looked at the environment that the body was in, and then photographs were taken at my direction by the investigator.
Then what did you do next?
So the body was underneath a considerable amount of brush and debris, and the layers of that brush and debris were removed again at my direction, and we then assessed the body as it was in its position.
And in all fairness, the brush and debris was kind of slowly removed, so each little process could be photographed. Is that
That's
fair?
correct.
At some point, was the torso removed and transferred back to your medical office?
It was under my direction.
Okay. And what does that mean under your direction? Is there a certain procedure that you guys use?
There is. Once we look at the body as it is, we roll the body and look at all the sides. We photograph the body in multiple angles, and we then wrap the body in an evidence sheet. Usually, if the body is intact, we will bag the hands and the feet to protect evidence that may be there. In this case, there were no limbs for us to bag separately, but we did wrap the body in a sheet, placed it into a clean body bag, and then we transported it back to our office for further examination.
And back at your office, what, if any, sort of examination do you perform?
So back at the office, we have the resources, the lighting, and the tools available to perform a complete examination on the body, on the outside and the inside. We begin with an external exam where we look at the surfaces and the injuries and the markings of the body and document everything that we see with our eyes. Following that, and as well as collection of any evidence that we see. Following that, we then open the body and we examine the internal organs and any injuries that we see on the inside of the body and collect any specimens that we may need to evaluate later.
Do you x-ray the body?
We do.
And did that x-ray in this case help with identification?
It did.
And who was this torso? Who did you identify as it belonging to? Or as it being?
Right. So we often evaluate bodies that come in without an identity. And so often they will come with a presumed identity. In this case, we were told that the presumed identity of the body was Bart Halderson. We received imaging x-rays of Bart Halderson that were taken while he was alive. And we then compared those to the x-rays that we took of the body that we had in our office. And I found multiple points of concordance that identified this body scientifically as Bart Halderson.
Like what?
And did you folks also collect DNA from the torso?
We did.
I am going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 372. And that's called a DNA spot card, is that correct?
That is correct.
And this appears to be the evidence envelope for Bart B. Halderson's DNA spot card.
That is correct.
And did you collect that DNA, or did somebody from the sheriff's office?
This would have been either myself or my team with my autopsy tech.
I move exhibit 372 into evidence at this time.
No objection.
It is received.
Okay. Doctor, why don't we move on to page 2?
Folks, I want to tell you two things. If you look at the cover page, you'll see a small numeral in the bottom right-hand corner. All of the pages have those, and they're numbered. So if you were to lose your place, you could find out the next page by searching out those numbers in that corner. Unlike the presentations last week, this one doesn't work its way slowly into the process. I just wanted to alert you to that. Go ahead, Attorney Raymond.
That's correct. Doctor, could you please describe page 2 to the jury?
Page 2 is one part of a 3-part overall photograph of the torso, showing the lower half or inferior part.
And there's 2 circles on the right-hand side of this slide or this photo. What are those circles highlighting?
The circles on the right are highlighting the severed femurs of the body. Basically, the body was dismembered with the lower limbs removed, and the circles show the terminal ends of the femur bones.
And then there's a circle on the left side. What is the circle on the left side of page 2 highlighting?
The circle on the left side of page 2 shows a gunshot wound.
Moving on to page 3. Could you please describe page 3 for the jury?
Page 3 is part 2 of a 3-panel overall, showing the middle part of the body.
Okay, and a circle there again highlighting a gunshot wound.
That is correct. It is the same wound that is highlighted in the previous photograph.
And do you know it yet in this part of your autopsy if that's an entrance wound or an exit wound?
Yes, this is an exit wound.
An exit wound.
Yes.
All right. So, and we'll get more into that. Does that mean though that, for lack of a better term, Mr. Halderson was shot in the back?
That is correct.
Moving on to page 4.
Oh.
What does page 4 show?
Page 4 is part 3 of a 3-panel overall, showing the front half of the torso.
Okay, and again, there's 3
Stop it.
circles on the
You're
left
rubbing your
side of that
gooey eye.
slide. Would you explain what those 3 circles are highlighting?
Yes, so the circles on the top and the bottom highlight the severed upper extremities and the terminal ends of the humeral bones. The circle on the left in the middle, in between those two, shows the neck or the base of the neck where the head has been severed.
All right, let's turn to slide 5.
Stop.
How would you describe slide 5 for the jury?
Slide 5 shows the posterior or back side of the torso. For orientation, the head, or where the head would be on the left side, and the feet would be on the right side.
Okay, how would you describe what the red circle is highlighting on the rightmost side?
The right circle is circling what I have labeled as gunshot wound number 1. It is an entrance gunshot wound.
Okay, and how would you describe the circle on the more left side?
The left side is also a gunshot entrance wound, which I describe as gunshot wound number 2.
And doctor, how can you tell if a wound is an entrance wound or an exit wound?
There are characteristics which support wounds being either entrance wounds or exit wounds. In place, an entrance wound typically has a round shape and an abrasion collar where the bullet abrades the skin as it enters the body. We can also find, depending on the range of fire, if the gun was fired at a close range to the body, we can sometimes find evidence of burned and unburned gunpowder particles, soot, and things like this.
Okay,
Yeah, all those things.
let's move on to slide 6. What is slide 6 showing?
Slide 6 is a closer view of the left-sided or superior or closer to the head gunshot entrance wound from the previous slide.
Okay. And were you able to, based on the characteristics, look at the surrounding area under a microscope?
That is correct.
And when you look at a wound or an entrance wound or whatever sort of wound under a microscope, what are you looking for?
So sometimes we can see soot with our eyes without any assistance because there's a black residue. However, in this case, there was decompositional artifact that obscured and discolored the areas. So what I did was I sampled 4 areas from each wound and looked at it under the microscope. And what that allowed me to see was microscopic evidence of soot that I could not see without the assistance of a microscope.
And based on, are you able to make any determinations based on amount of soot or whether soot is present or not?
I can comment on whether it was present or not in the pieces of tissue that I submitted. So I see a 2-dimensional plane of cells under the microscope. And in those pieces that I sampled, if it is present, then I can see that it's there. It appears as black granular debris deposited within the dermis, which is the second layer underneath the very surface of the skin. And if I don't see it, it does not necessarily mean it is not present at all. It only means that it was not present in the tissue that I sampled.
And what is the relationship between how far away a gun is from a person's skin and soot?
Typically, you're expecting a contact range gunshot if soot is seen.
All right, so if there's soot present,
within inches.
That means within, I'm sorry,
Inches.
Inches, okay. And if soot is not present, what, if anything, does that tell you about the gun range in relationship to the victim's skin?
Yes, so that it can say a couple of things. It can say if there is no soot, it can say that the range of fire was farther away and that there was too much distance for soot to make it to the body. It can also say that something could have been in the way that could have obstructed soot from making it to the body. So there could have been layers of clothing or a wall or a door or something obstructing soot making it to the body.
And when you looked at the wound that is pictured in slide 6, what, if any, evidence did you find of soot?
I did not find microscopic evidence of soot in this injury.
So what range do you put for this wound?
For this, I have indeterminate range because I do not have characteristics that can tell me what the range is.
So basically that means it could be feet instead of inches. Is that a fair way to say it?
It is. It means I do not know the range.
Okay. I'm going to turn to slide 7. What is pictured on slide 7?
Slide 7 is a metal fragment that was found in the wound track representing a fragment of projectile.
And during this autopsy, projectile fragments were turned over to the Dane County Sheriff's Office, right?
Yes, that is correct.
But then you came across one later during the process of examining the bones.
Yes, so due to the sensitive nature of this case, our office retained the body in our cooler. I then re-examined the body later on in order to fully understand the wound tracks. Upon that second exam is when I found the additional fragment.
I'm going to show you Exhibit 555. And when you found that additional fragment, did you turn it over to the Sheriff's Office as well?
I did.
Okay. And on Exhibit 555, does that appear to be the label for the metal fragment that you turned over to Tim Blank from the Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
I move Exhibit 555 into evidence at this time.
No objection.
Thank you. It is received.
Just seems like a happy judge.
All right. Turning now to slide 8.
No.
Could you please
No.
describe slide 8 for the
No.
jury?
Get out.
Slide 8 represents, it's a similar
Oh, yeah.
photograph, but it highlights a different gunshot entrance wound.
Okay. The one that's more on the right or lower in the back.
That is correct. It is closer to the feet than the entrance wound that was previously discussed.
Okay. And flipping to slide 9.
Slide 9 is a close-up photograph of the entrance wound that was in the previous slide on slide 8.
And were you able to look microscopically for soot on this wound?
I did.
And this is wound number 1 in your report, I believe.
That is correct.
And were you able to determine what range or what distance the gun was from the skin based upon the microscopic findings?
There were granular particles within the dermis on microscopy of the tissue I submitted here that were consistent with soot. Therefore, I assessed this as a contact range gunshot entrance wound.
Oh.
So there was soot on the skin.
Yes.
So contact range. And again, going from back to front.
Correct.
Slide 10.
Slide 10
So
shows the
shot in the
anterior or front
back.
surface of the body, and a gunshot exit wound is highlighted.
And is that the exit wound from shot 1 or shot 2?
That is the exit wound from gunshot wound number 1, the contact range gunshot wound.
All right, and let's move to slide 11, please.
Slide 11 demonstrates a close-up of the slide 10, the exit gunshot wound from gunshot wound number 1.
And the shape there is just kind of showing that with exit wounds, you can't usually put them back perfectly together like you can an entrance wound.
That is correct. As we discussed, the tests are not exit wounds tend to reapproximate, and this is just showing that irregular margin of the exit wound on the anterior surface.
Slide number 12. What is slide number 12 highlighting?
Slide number 12 also shows an anterior version of the torso, and it is highlighting hemorrhage at the neck.
Okay. And there's like a ruler sticker there.
Yes.
What are you measuring there?
We use a label that has a scale on it that puts our unique identification number, so that every photograph that we take has that unique identification number, and that scale allows us to measure whatever is in the field that we are photographing.
And is this hemorrhage from the mutilation or is this hemorrhage from a bullet?
The hemorrhage is surrounding the gunshot wounds.
Okay. And slide 13, please.
Slide 13 shows the base of the neck around the area of the right shoulder, and it is a ragged defect that is circled in the center right above that scale, and it represents a possible entry or exit for a third gunshot wound.
So there are at least 2 gunshot wounds, 1 and 2, that we discussed, and a possible third here.
Correct. We discussed 2 gunshot wounds, and then this is a third.
And were you able to look microscopically at this third gunshot wound?
I'm going to refer to my report.
Sure.
It was 3.
So on page 8 of 10, I have the descriptions of my histologic slides, and I submitted skin tissue only from the entrances and the exit previously discussed. I did not submit skin from this.
And is that partly because of the jagged nature? And it seems like there's more disruption to
That
the
is
skin.
That is correct. Additionally, the bullet material that was found directly underneath it, it's going to be impossible to tell if that represents the entirety of the wound track or if there is tissue missing because of the proximity to the severed head.
Jesus.
Thank you. Exhibit 14, could you tell us what that slide exhibits?
Slide 14 is a portion of our posterior soft tissue dissection showing hemorrhage surrounding where I recovered the bullet fragments from the neck.
And then slide 15.
Slide 15 is jacket fragments and left core fragments that were recovered from the neck.
Sorry, what was the second thing you said after jacket fragments?
So there's more than one part of a bullet. So there's the lead core of a bullet, and then there's the jacket that covers the bullet, and both are represented here.
It was the word lead I missed. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Doctor, obviously the legs, the arms, and the head were removed from this torso. Is there any can you make any determination whether those that disfigurement or dismemberment occurred before or after Mr. Halderson, Bart Halderson died?
So one thing that helps us determine whether or not an injury occurred before or after death is the presence or absence of a vital reaction or hemorrhage. So we've been talking about me finding hemorrhage in areas of injury. In the areas where the gunshot entrances were, there was hemorrhage around it, indicating that the heart was beating when the individual was shot. Where I recovered bullet fragments, there was hemorrhage or vital reaction surrounding that area. However, in the areas surrounding the dismembered limbs, or the head, the upper extremities, and the lower extremities, there were injuries, but I did not appreciate this vital reaction. I did not appreciate hemorrhage in the same way that I appreciated around the other injuries.
So the mutilation occurred after death.
That is correct.
Doctor, did you determine a cause of death for Bart Halderson?
I did.
And what was that cause of death?
As written on page 2 of my report, I determined the cause of death was gunshot wounds of the torso.
And did you determine a manner of death?
I did.
And what was the manner of death for Bart Halderson?
As I'm reading on page
Homicide.
2 of my report, I assessed that the manner of death was homicide.
Counsel, I believe page 16 of the booklet hasn't been discussed. And if you don't want to publish that page, that's fine. But I don't think I heard any testimony about that
Oh,
page.
I'm sorry. My pages were just sticking together. I apologize, everyone. Doctor, could you look at page 16?
Yes.
What does 16 show?
Page 16 is also a representation of the posterior back side of the torso around the area of the hip, or the right hip or the flank. This represents a small ligature furrow. When the body was found at the scene, there was a length of rope that was encircling the body, and this was the area corresponding to where the rope was likely rubbing against the body.
So that's a wound from the rope.
That's correct.
And do you
What the
know
hell was
of the
the rope
gunshot
used
wounds?
for?
Do you know, were both of them fatal? Was one, just one of
Get
them
it.
fatal or something else?
I would say that they were all fatal.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Good afternoon, doctor.
Good afternoon.
Let's just start there with the 3 gunshot wounds. There's no way for you to tell which happened first, second, or third, correct?
That is correct. So when I was talking about
Doesn't
the
matter,
vital
they were
reaction
all
or the hemorrhage,
fatal.
I can say that something happened before or after someone died, but with rare exceptions, am I able to say the order that one happened over the other?
Doesn't
And
matter.
in your report, you noted.
All 3 of them
I
could have
think
been
you used the
fatal.
word at least 3 gunshot wounds. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And why use the phrase at least?
So in this case, I have missing tissue. I have missing upper extremities, lower extremities, and a missing head. So
Because
in
your
the
client cut off
portion
the
of
rest of
the
the
remains that I
parts.
received, there were 3 gunshot wounds, evidence of 3 gunshot wounds, but I cannot say whether or not there are additional gunshot wounds that could be in tissue that is absent or that I don't have the ability to evaluate.
And because on the 3 you were able to evaluate, you did see evidence of this vital reaction. Is it fair to say it's your opinion that the person was alive when these gunshot wounds happened?
Yes,
And if there were other gunshot wounds to other extremities that you weren't able to examine, you wouldn't be able to tell if those were the same, having vital reaction, or not having vital reaction, obviously.
if the remains are not available, I cannot tell.
Now, you did testify that the dismemberment happened post-mortem because there was no vital reaction, correct?
Correct.
Are you able to say how long after the person died that the dismemberment happened?
Not with any certainty or with very much accuracy. There are estimations I could make based off of the decomposition that I saw. I can say that my findings are consistent with the circumstances that were given to me, but that's about as far as I could comfortably say.
Now, on page 2 of the report, when you talk about manner of death, you'd already testified that it was ruled homicide, but then there's a bracket where you say shot by other, parentheses S, with unknown firearm. So other or others, there's nothing about your examination that can tell you how many people might have been involved in shooting this person, correct?
That is correct. Because there is more than one gunshot wound, and because I was not present, I cannot say whether or not those were inflicted by one or more firearms.
You can say it wasn't this person self-inflicting.
Yes,
And again, just so we're clear, unknown firearm, there's nothing about your examination that could tell you what firearm caused these shots, correct?
correct. The characteristics of the injuries are not such that I can tell a caliber or a type of firearm.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
May the doctor be excused.
They may.
I'll take your report.
That was useless. Defense has no rhyme or reason for anything that they say.
And we should collect the booklets that were utilized with the witness. Let me inquire, Attorney Raymond, who's next in the witness list? Folks, given the nature of the next testimony and the length of time, we've been here an hour, but it's also been an hour that was intense. So let's go ahead and take a break at this point for convenience, and we'll come back in 10 minutes and resume with the next witness. Thank you.
All right, for the jury.
And the state will call the next witness, please.
I call Denise Jones from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab.
Just looks
I've had
boring.
discussion with every witness about whether they are willing to or believe they can safely and responsibly testify without a mask, but I've not ordered anyone to do so. Is it your preference to remain masked at this time, or could you testify without?
I'd prefer to have it on.
Very good. Then if you can pull the microphone.
I get annoyed
close, because it
every
does have a
time
tendency to
somebody says
muffle,
that.
and we'll make sure
It's
that we can
annoying.
hear you and the jury can hear you.
Masks
Thank you.
are
Go ahead.
stupid.
Good afternoon. Could you please state and spell your name for the court?
Denise Jones, DENISEJONES.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a senior forensic scientist in the DNA
Ow.
analysis unit at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Madison.
How long have you been employed by the Wisconsin State Crime Lab?
14 and a half years.
What are your duties and responsibilities there?
I examine evidence for the presence of biological stains, such as blood, semen, and saliva. I extract DNA from those stains and make comparisons to known individuals. I write reports on my findings, and I testify in court if necessary.
Could you tell us about your educational background?
I received my Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point in 2001, and I received my Master's of Science in Bacteriology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2004.
Have you received any specialized training in the field of serology, DNA, statistics, things of that sort?
Yes, I received 9 months of training on DNA analysis prior to doing casework. I also received training on statistics and star mix for about 2 months prior to doing it to casework. I'm required to take 8 hours of continuing education every year.
Have you, prior to today and previously, have you testified as an expert in court?
Yes, this is my 48th time.
Can you tell us, we'll talk a little bit about the laboratory, the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory. Is that an accredited lab?
Yes, it is.
And what does that mean?
It means we meet accurate and reliable testing.
Do you and your lab undergo any sort of proficiency testing?
Yes, I am required to
Hold on, I
undergo
gotta
super proficiency
adjust
testing.
something. I'm gonna mute.
So in casework and to see if we can accurately and reliably do DNA analysis.
What is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the DNA we inherit from our parents. We inherit 50% from our fathers and 50% from our mothers, and it codes for all structure and function in our body. And DNA is found in every cell in the body except for red blood cells. So it's found in skin cells, white blood cells, and sperm cells.
How is DNA used in forensic science?
So most of our DNA is similar person to person, but there are specific areas that distinguish us from others. And it's those areas that we look at in DNA in forensics. Everyone will have differences except identical siblings. We look at 23 of these genetic markers and one that's specific for gender.
You said everyone will have different DNA other than identical siblings.
That's correct.
Can you tell us how DNA testing is conducted at the laboratory?
Can you be a little bit more specific?
Sure. What's the steps for conducting DNA testing when you're at the crime lab?
So we have multiple steps in the DNA analysis process. We have what's called extraction, which we are extracting the DNA from the sample or opening up the cell to get the DNA. We have quantitation, which allows us to determine how much DNA is in a sample, which will allow us to know whether or not we need to go on for further testing. And currently our kits, we can determine how much human DNA is present, how much male DNA is present, and whether or not we can detect degradation or inhibition in the sample.
Are these methods of testing and typing generally accepted by the scientific community?
Yes,
And do the majority of forensic scientists use these methods that you use?
yes.
Are there multiple levels of review conducted to ensure that the correct procedures are followed in each case?
Yes, we have what's called technical review, which another qualified analyst also reviews the case file and report and looks to see that I followed our procedure manual correctly for interpretation, statistics, and notes.
Showing what's been marked in this case is exhibit number 380. This will just be brief, but can you tell me what that is?
That's a copy of my statement of qualifications.
And does that list your training and education in this field, making you qualified to comment on some of the matters you're going to comment on today?
Yes.
I'll move 380 into evidence.
No objection.
Thank you. It is received.
At times over the past year, since July of this year, have you been asked to become involved at various times into an investigation into a homicide that occurred over in Windsor involving some people with the names of Bart Halderson, Krista Halderson, Chandler Halderson?
Yes.
And have you produced numerous reports related to your analysis of separate items that have been submitted to you over that course of time?
Yes, I believe 4 reports.
Can I briefly ask you who makes the decision to submit items to the crime lab?
That's up to the agency to submit, but then we also have submission guidelines in place on certain types of cases of how many items we'll allow upon submission. But as long as we have a meeting with the agency, we may allow more.
Sure. In general, in most cases, what is that limit of items that can be submitted?
10 for homicides.
And was that far exceeded in this case?
Yes,
Okay. And you were in fact the one who had to do the testing.
yes.
Okay. I'm showing you what's been marked in this case. I'm going to show you all 4 exhibits at once, then we'll go through them. Can you tell us what exhibit number 383 is, just briefly? And you might want to turn 1 page in.
This is my report dated July 29th. It has my signature on it.
And is that
Can't
appear to be a
breathe
true
in
accurate
too
copy of the
hard.
report?
Yes,
I'll show you what's been
God,
marked in this
lady.
case is exhibit number 417. Same question.
Ridiculous.
Turn a page in and let me know what that is.
this is my report dated September 1st, 2021.
And does that appear to be a true and accurate report or a copy of the report on that date?
It appears to be.
Okay, I'll take that one from you. Showing you what's been marked as exhibit number 418. Same question.
This is a report dated October 6th, 2021 that I authored.
And you appear to be a true and accurate copy.
Yes,
And lastly, 560. Same questions.
this appears to be a report that I authored dated November 8th, 2021.
True and accurate copy.
Yes,
At this time, Judge, I'll move 417, 18, 383, and 560 in evidence.
Any objection?
no objection.
They are all received.
And I'll move to publish.
You may publish.
Ms. Jones, in preparation for testifying today, in order to make this a more visually understandable experience for everyone, you understand that your report has been maybe cut apart and put into a PowerPoint for everyone to see.
Yes,
And so we'll start with, you were asked to perform a report, and you did write a report on July 29th, 2021. Was this your first report in this case?
yes, it was.
And as I'm talking about each report, in fact, I'll just give you a copy, and you can go ahead and just let us know if you're referencing that report, okay? And I see you brought some materials with you. If you need to reference anything, you can just let us know that you need to refresh your recollection, and we'll let you go ahead and do that. Just so there's a clear record, we'll just say that out loud, even though it might be a tad awkward or not normal. We'll go through this one somewhat slowly so everyone can understand maybe how these reports take form. But the first section of your report, we talk about items examined. So what did you examine here?
I examined a dried blood standard reportedly from Bart Halderson, an electric toothbrush head reportedly used by Krista Halderson, and then some samples reportedly of human remains, K1 through K6 of differing body parts, and then a buccal swab standard reportedly from Mitchell Halderson.
Okay. And I'm going to show you a couple of these items just so we're talking about the same thing. I'm going to show you what's been received into evidence already in this case. It's been labeled with the exhibit sticker 194, and it's labeled electric toothbrush head. We're not going to open it or anything, but do you see anything on there that indicates that item has been to the lab?
It has our yellow barcode label with the case number and the item number.
And the case number in this case is what?
M211575.
And what is an item number?
It's just the item that we give each item that comes into the lab.
Okay. So while the police may have labeled it with a letter or a number, and maybe in court, we put a sticker on it with a different number, you have your own system and you put your own letter to it.
Yes,
Okay. And what letter is that?
item I.
All right. Same question with the item labeled Mr. Halderson DNA spot card. What item is that?
That is M211575, item B.
For the record, we're talking about exhibit 372 and then 361. What item is that?
It's M211575, item N.
Okay. So these items come into the lab. Can you tell me just a bit, and we won't do this for each item, but when the police bring you out an item, how are they processed in? I imagine there's not just a mailbox out front, that there's some process for this.
They usually
Probably not.
meet with an evidence specialist that will take inventory of all the items and then give them a receipt of their items and then create the case and all the item numbers in our LIMS system.
We'll go to the next slide. And here it says preparation for analysis. In your report, what does preparation for analysis mean?
It means when I took swabbings or cuttings from each of these items, I took a portion of that item, and so I'm sub-designating the cuttings or the swabbings that I took for each item. So on the left, we have the sample name, and in the middle is what the parent item is, and then we have the sub-designation of what I made of the cuttings or the swabbings I took from those items.
So if you take a swab of, say, item B, which is the Bart Halderson blood standard from the medical examiner office, you take a cotton swab and then you cut something off that swab?
Well, it was a blood standard given, so I just cut a portion of the dried blood standard, and then I sub-designated it as B1.
So some of the original remains?
Original blood that was given to me, yes.
And when we sub-designate something, and again, we'll go through this one a little bit more carefully, and I think everyone will get the hang of it in a second, but when we sub-designate something, is it always carry that same letter and then add usually either a number or a letter to it?
Either depending on what the parent item is. So in this instance, there's item B. So the sub-designation would be B1. And then for the portion cut from the left leg tissue, the item was K1, but the sub-designation I made was K1A.
After you prepare them for analysis, I imagine you do some sort of DNA isolation.
Yes, we called, this is the quantification results that we got from the items that I did the DNA extraction on. And this table just explains the results of those quantitation and whether or not they went on for further analysis.
Sure. So in item B1 and N1, and we'll just use B1 as an example here, meaning it was the blood standard. Here you indicate you found human DNA.
Right. When we do standard extractions, we typically go from extraction right into the amplification stage. We don't usually quantify these standards unless there's a necessity to do it.
And when in the further testing column, it says autosomal STR, what does that mean?
That's the amplification that we use to detect human or DNA profiles from.
When we go to K2A, K5A, and K6A, could you remind us again, based on the report, what were those items where it says, because here it says, of course, human DNA not detected. What were K2A, K5A, and K6A? What were those cuttings of?
K2A was a cutting of reported left thigh tissue, and then K5A and K6A were swabbings of the hollow area of the left and right thigh bones.
And I made this slide to maybe highlight that, again, going through this one more carefully for the jury. Here you actually had portions of thigh tissue that you were not able to detect DNA on.
That's correct.
And as an analyst, is that something that can be explained, or do you have any comments on how possibly part of a cutting from a human thigh tissue, there was no DNA detectable on that?
The item received, when I examined it, did not really appear to have a lot of pink tissue. It was very whitish in color, and it had a distinct odor to it when examining it. So I knew I would probably have a difficult time of getting DNA recovered from that. Based on my experience, items like those are difficult to recover DNA from due to a possible bacterial activity inhibiting the ability to recover DNA.
Okay, so sometimes bacterial activity or things being in the elements and subjected to that can have an impact on whether you can obtain the DNA.
Yes.
Okay. But you were able to identify or find DNA or detect DNA from K1A, which is of the same general items.
K1A was left leg tissue.
Okay. And so next you have some standards. So you have the dry blood standard from Bart Halderson, item B1, and then you have Mitchell Halderson, which you labeled as N1, and you have single source profile. What does the single source profile mean?
When we get the data after amplification and typing the DNA, we interpret the DNA and we can determine whether the profile is from one contributor, which is a single source profile, or from more than one person, which is a mixture. And in this case, when I was doing the analysis of the data, both of these items appeared to be from single source individuals.
And when we look at the swabbing of the bristles on the electric toothbrush head that you say reportedly was used by Krista Halderson, what does that mean when you wrote single source female profile? Explain that.
It only came from
So we
her.
have the ability in our amplification kit that has one area that we can
The
determine
single
gender.
source.
And in this case, females will have an XX and
Only
the male will have an XY.
hers.
And when interpreting this profile, there was only the X for the gender, indicating it was a female single source profile.
Moving to the next portion, you start talking about this item K1A, in which you were able
Ma'am,
to
take off
isolate
your mask.
some DNA. Tell us what this section.
All I hear is you breathing.
So the result is that I got a partial
Super
single source female
freaking
profile,
annoying.
which means I didn't get a complete profile, but I got a pretty good profile from it. Out of the 23 markers that we do amplification on, I had 22 of them. And so that makes it a partial profile. And then I compared that partial profile to the swabbing, to the profile I got from the swabbing of the electric toothbrush head.
She has the hiccups.
And Krista Halderson was considered the source of that profile.
And understanding at that time, identifying Krista Halderson and her remains was important.
No.
Did you then use the
No.
buckle swab or the
I
single source
goober.
profile from
No.
the reported son, Mitchell, as well as what you knew to be
Jesus
Bart,
Christ
to try to
almighty.
get to some sort of conclusions as well?
Yes, I did a paternity to determine whether or not those remains could also be of the possible biological mother of Mitchell Halderson, knowing that Bart Halderson was the biological father. And it was at least 413 billion times more likely to observe the profile from Mitchell Halderson if the female profile detected from the left leg tissue is his biological mother than if it's a random unrelated female unrelated female is the mother.
Fair to say a good part of this report was simply determining the sources of the DNA. So you had Krista, Bart, Mitchell, and eventually you obtained Chandler Halderson's DNA, correct?
Yes.
You then wrote another report on September 1st, and I'll bring that one to you. That's labeled as exhibit number 417. Fair to say in this report, we start testing pieces of evidence, maybe the more traditional thing that folks might think about when they think of your job. We're talking about evidence that was collected.
Yes,
You examined a lot of items, correct?
yes,
I think you talked about examining here a garbage bin, item C2, a tarp that was sub-designated C2, meaning it was inside the garbage bin, I would imagine.
oh, there were two items. The parent item was item C, that was a garbage bin and a tarp, and then we sub-designated the garbage bin and the tarp as two separate items.
And then you labeled item D, scissors, item E, a broken saw blade, item F, a handsaw, item G, pruning shears, item L and M, both metal fragments, item P, a buckle swab from Chandler Halderson, and item S, a tarp that was recovered from a barn.
That's correct.
You did some blood testing on some of these items, correct?
Yes.
Let's talk
The
about that.
explanation
We heard
of
yesterday
DNA
from
is
Deputy
boring.
Leatherberry. He testified extensively about some of the blood tests he did. What does it mean when you write this in your report that you identified blood?
So when we identify blood in the lab, it's similar to, the testing is similar to a pregnancy test or a COVID test, where we're taking a little bit of the sample, adding some liquid reagent to it, and then adding it to a card. And for us to say blood was identified, we must see 2 lines. And if we only get 1 line, then blood was not detected on the item. And in this case, I had 2 positive lines when testing these items. So blood was identified on all of these items.
And Ms. Jones, if you wouldn't mind, would you step up here for a second, and we'll start talking first about item C that you sub-designated.
Jesus
C1
Christ,
and
you're
C2.
gonna
I'll
make
move the
breathe
rest of them, but
harder.
I can't move one of them. Could you take a look at this large item, this box that's in here? I believe this has been marked as an exhibit in this case, as exhibit number 14, and we don't have to open it. And
Freezer.
I know there's reasons it's secured at this point, but could you let me know, do those stickers appear to be from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab and appear to be what you've labeled as item C, then sub-designated C1 and C2? Okay, you can take a seat again. In the garbage bin, item C1, you indicate you were able to identify blood. Do you recall where you were able to identify blood in the garbage bin?
Can I refer to my notes?
You can. Just let us know when you've refreshed your recollection.
I tested a swab that was from a stain near where the tape was inside the garbage bin.
And that was positive for blood?
Yes,
And then as to the tarp that's inside item C2, same question. Was that a swab of one of the stains on the tarp?
both of them were, yes.
So item C2, and then I promised you that I'd carry the rest. This, I think, has been identified and perhaps colloquially called the barn tarp. The tarp reportedly recovered from a barn in the Irwin Road property.
The barn
Does that
tarp.
appear to have your lab sticker on it?
Yes, it's M21-1575, item S.
Okay, excellent. And we won't open this. I understand why. But on this, you were able to identify blood as well?
Yes,
And was that on staining that you were able to observe?
yes.
The detective's actually going to assist me for a little bit because we're going to maybe look at some of these items. Next, we're going to talk about item D, which is the scissors, which has been marked in this case as exhibit number 142. So the detective actually just approached you with that, if that's okay. Same question, is that the item, those scissors that you were able to look at the crime lab?
It has our designation of M21-1575, item D.
Okay, and we don't have to open that right now. We can actually probably just sit it right there because we're going to come back to it. But on the scissors, were you able to detect blood?
Yes.
And do you know where?
Can I refer to my notes?
Yes, just let us know when you've refreshed your memory.
I identified blood on the blade of the scissors.
And next, we're going to talk about
Use the
the
scissors.
broken saw blade. I believe that's been received into evidence as exhibit number 141. We'll have the detective approach you with it. If you could look at that, make sure your lab sticker's on there, and we'll leave it with the scissors.
It appears to have our barcode M21-1575, item E.
Or barcode.
For everyone's reference, at exhibit 141, I believe broken saw blade testified to being recovered at the Irwin Road property. Were you able to detect blood on that saw blade?
Yes,
And the blade, or was it just a swab of the blade in general?
it was the teeth of the blade.
Okay. Next, item F. We're just going to move that up there. This is I believe, received into evidence in this case as exhibit number 140, an Alway brand handsaw.
Yes, it has our barcode label on it, M21-1575, item F.
And were you able to detect blood on that item?
Yes,
And do you know where?
on the blade.
And next, we're going to look at item G, same process. I appreciate the detective helping us out. If you could just confirm the lab stickers on there.
Yes, it has our barcode M211575 item G.
Ma'am, you are sitting there. Why are you breathing so hard
Are you always
into
able to conduct a blood test on samples you receive?
the mask?
Not always.
In what situations are you not?
Depending on how much staining is on an item. If there's very little staining on it, it's up to the analyst, maybe in discussion with the agency or on their own, to only go on for DNA analysis because there won't be enough to test for blood and do DNA. Because we're taking a portion of that stain to do the screening test for blood, there might not be enough to do DNA analysis. So for us, it's more important to get a DNA profile from that than maybe doing screening on it.
In this specific case, did you work in conjunction with detectives and investigators, including Deputy Leatherberry, regarding items being submitted to the lab?
Yes.
Are you aware that sometimes he was performing tests to detect blood or human blood himself?
Yes.
And if those situations came up or arose regarding a very limited amount that he had already performed
freaking
a test, there'd be a
concentrate.
discussion
I can't
about
even
maybe
pay
it being more
attention.
important to do DNA
All I
analysis
hear is
on your part.
breathing.
Yes.
You
Can't.
prepared these items for analysis, and we don't have to explain it again, but essentially you took swabs and there's some cuttings of those swabs, correct?
Yes.
And you're able to do some analysis. So in each one, you're able to figure out if there's human DNA present, perhaps male DNA present, and then decide whether there's further testing that you can do.
Yes.
Okay. And let's just take an example of a couple different, there's 3 different ways you've responded here. Item C1, B1, which was a portion of the swab cut from the inside lip of the garbage bin. Here it says human DNA present, male DNA present, but not selected for further testing. Can you tell us why?
Like I was explaining quantitation, our kit has the ability to detect human and male DNA, but we also have the ability to determine whether or not the sample has inhibition or degradation. And in this case, the sample had a very high degradation
Still
rate.
right here.
And if this went on for
Just
further analysis, I would likely
readjusting.
not get something interpretal for DNA. And there were plenty of other items that were going on for further testing. So this one was not selected.
Okay. The next possible result in the further testing column is for most of them, you write autosomal STR. What does that mean?
That means it went on to amplification, which is the DNA making copies of itself, and then going on for typing, which is taking that amplified DNA to detect a profile.
And the other option here is we see for item C, 2I1 and S3A, you write unsuitable. What does unsuitable mean, and why is that different than not selected?
So in the human DNA column, I have limited human DNA, and I also have limited male DNA. And based on those results, they were below our threshold for samples to go on for further analysis. So these samples were not taken for further analysis, so no DNA profile was developed from these items.
The next item we're going to look at is, and I'll have the detective, if he wants to grab Mr. Halderson's buckle, and I'll approach you with that. But you had from your July 29th report, you had some standards, meaning you had the single source profile of Bart Halderson and Mitchell Halderson.
Yes.
Okay. And you, based on the toothbrush head in your analysis, you believe you had Krista Halderson.
Yes.
Okay. And in this report, September 1st, you were provided a buccal swab reportedly obtained from Chandler Halderson.
Yes.
Judge, can we approach real quick?
Yes.
Not moving at all. Good.
All right. And I know we've looked at the other swabs previously, or the source profiles, but could you tell me, I'm showing you it's been marked as exhibit number 360. Could you tell me what that is?
That's the crime lab's item designation M211575 item P.
And what does this appear to be to you?
A buccal swab standard from Chandler Halderson.
At that point, you did some analysis on all of these items using those source profiles. Is that correct?
I made comparisons from the buccal swab standards to the evidence profiles developed.
Okay, and we're going to talk about those. Why are some of these grouped up in maybe one major result and some of them separated out individually?
This one was grouped together because it was the same male profile was detected from all of these items. So we like to group them together to kind of condense the report so it's not even longer than it already is.
And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And so I'm going to show you some items, but let's start with here. You say the swabbings from the stains. I think you testified there was blood on item C2, and there are some sub designations there, D1, G1, and H1. What do those sub designations mean again?
They're just different areas of the tarps that I swabbed, and then the cuttings that I took from those swabs that I took from the tarp.
And what was your conclusion related to the stains on that tarp that was found in the garbage cans, at least the swabs C2, D1, C2, G1, and C2, H1?
They were single source male profiles from the same individual.
And who was that individual?
Bart Halderson was the source.
Is there any numerical value attached to when you say someone is the source?
For us to consider someone the source, the profile that the stat that we calculate, the profile has to be rarer than 1 in 7 trillion individuals, which is 1,000 times the world's population.
And here you say Krista, Mitchell, and Chandler are excluded. What does it mean for someone to be excluded?
They are not the source of that profile.
And the last line, additional possible trace alleles were detected, and it goes on. What does that line mean?
It means when I was analyzing the data from items F2 and L1, there were a couple minor types seen that I couldn't really say anything about. They could be just non-true peaks or artifacts from the application project. So they're trace alleles, and I'm not making any conclusions on those.
Okay, excellent. And the next item that's in this grouping is the swabbing of the staining. I think you've already testified about on the teeth blade of the handsaw, item F2.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm going to have the detective who's masked and gloved up with clean gloves, I would imagine, remove F2 from the box and just display to the jury. So we're recalling the same item. And first, I'll have the analyst look at that. Is that, in fact, the item that we're talking about?
Yes.
And I'll have the detective just remove that, and I'll ask you some questions about it. And I'll have him walk in front of the jury, and I'll ask you a couple of questions. What was your conclusion related to the swabbing of the staining on that saw, and I think it's been testified, purportedly recovered at the Irwin Road property?
It was a single source male profile.
And who was that profile?
Bart Halderson was
And-
the source of that profile.
And the numerical value you gave previously, same answer for this one?
Yes.
So I'll ask the detective to re-glove at this point. The next item we'll talk about, and just to make sure we're all looking at the same thing, we'll remove it again. You swabbed the stains on the clippers at the ends of the pruning shears, which is item G3.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so first we'll show you the box. Is that in fact the item that we're discussing?
Yes.
All right, and I'll have the detective display it to the jury while I ask you the question. Item G3, what were your conclusions as to that item?
It was a single source male profile, and Bart Halderson was the source of that profile.
Okay, we'll return that item to the box.
Okay, I don't know if I was ever here or not here. Just had to move some things around because I wasn't happy. Still not happy. But it is what it is.
Next, there are
And
two
that's
items,
just
and
how
as the
it's
detective gets ready, L1 and M1. You list them as metal fragments, but you say something that we haven't seen yet, which is washings of. What does that mean, the washing of something?
That means the item was small enough that I could actually place the item in a tube and add reagent to it. And it's what we call a washing because it's not a swabbing and it's not a cutting of. We're washing that item to recover any DNA that may be from it. And then we remove the item from the liquid, and then that goes on for DNA extraction.
Do you find that to be a reliable method?
Yes, we use it in other items of evidence too.
Okay. We're going to show you what's been marked. Again, we're not opening these. Show you what's been marked in this case is exhibit number 285 and 286. I believe testified from Investigator Leatherberry as metal fragments recovered from the basement of the Halderson home. Are those the items that we're discussing?
Yes.
And did you in fact wash those items?
Yes, I did.
Were these items you were able to perform blood tests on?
No, based on the limited amount of sample size, it went on for DNA analysis.
And what was the result of the DNA analysis on items L1 and M1, which is also, I guess for our purposes, exhibits 285 and 286?
They were single source mail profiles from the same individual, and Bart Halderson was the source of that profile.
Next, and we're just going to go through the whole report, even when it maybe didn't lead to anything. Here you indicate the swab from the stain on the tarp, item C2E1. Was this another stain you found on the tarp?
Yes.
And for everyone's purposes, is item C and then C2 the sub-designation?
Yes.
And you say partial low-level profile not suitable for comparisons due to limited amount of genetic information. Just explain that for us.
So sometimes
so
when
the
we
tarp didn't
develop
have
DNA
anything on
profiles,
it.
sometimes we don't get great profiles. And in this case, that was the instance where I didn't get anything that I could really make any conclusions on. So our procedure is to say a partial low-level profile and not make any comparisons to it.
You were able to find some comparisons, however, with other areas of that same tarp.
Yes.
Okay. And so now we're looking at your testing done on
Oh.
item C2F1, which we talk about the tarp, talking about the one in the garbage can, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what conclusions did you reach regarding that staining?
I detected a single source female profile, and Krista Halderson was the source of that profile.
Same numerical value that you previously gave regarding the sample?
Yes.
What is StarMix?
StarMix is a probabilistic genotyping software that we use in the lab, and it has the ability to deconvolute complex mixtures and then perform likelihood ratio calculations on those profiles when given a standard for reference.
And because of my question, perhaps we're about to see some of that testing done in this case of those results, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain what a likelihood ratio is?
If you want to go to the next slide, I can.
Sure. So here, for everyone's purposes, we're looking at StarMix slide from your lab report labeled swab from stain near where tape was inside garbage bin on item C1C1. Talk about this.
So a likelihood ratio is a ratio of two different
Don't tell me what to
hypotheses,
do.
and the statistic calculated gives support for one hypothesis over the other. So in this case, the top part of the table, it says H1. That's the first hypothesis, and that consists usually of the person of interest and an unknown individual, because in this case, it's a two-person mixture. So the person of interest and an unknown individual. And then the second hypothesis is that it's two unknown individuals.
How do you construct those likelihood ratio proportions?
It's based on the case information that we were given. And like I said, H1 is usually a hypothesis that the person of interest is included in that. And H2 is a hypothesis where the person of interest is not included.
And when you say person of interest, do you mean any of these standards being the person of interest?
Yes, on the left side of the table, each standard that I made a comparison to, they're listed. So it's Bart Halderson, Krista Halderson, Mitchell Halderson, and Chandler Halderson. Each of their standards were compared to the evidence profile in this case.
In this case,
Just
you
a
use
minute.
StarMix?
Yes.
Can you tell us why?
Based on our procedure manual, I needed to use StarMix in this case.
Sure. What is the mathematical process used by StarMix?
The mathematical process is a random resampling, and to be able to best explain the data and all the possible genotypes that could be part of this profile.
Are the methods you've described here for StarMix, are they generally accepted by people who do what you do for a living?
Yes.
So let's start talking about it. So as we go through, we're going to see some of the more simple line results, and then maybe we're going to see some more complex ones. This is StarMix.
Yes.
All right. When we're looking at this, let's start from the top. We're talking about a stain near where the tape was inside item C1, this large box here. And tell us what the jury is looking at here.
So you're looking at the table of the results and the conclusions from this.
That fixes
The first part says that it was a partial low-level two-person mixture. So when I was doing the analysis of the profile, I determined that more than one person contributed to this profile. And I knew that at least one male was included. So then that information is given to StarMix, and it deconvolutes the mixture and lets me know if it's has good results that I can go and do statistics from standards on. And in this case, it did. And then I have each standard compared to that profile, and it gives me a statistic of whether or not they can be included or excluded or uninformative.
In dealing with a situation in which every person of interest, and not using the term person of interest as a police officer might, and as I think you robbed the Walmart, as in person of interest meaning the person who you believe possibly might have their DNA included in this mix. Sometimes is it possible to see people who are biologically related have small support or moderate support for inclusion?
Yes, it's possible.
And I think when you started talking at the beginning, you indicated that we get our DNA from our parents.
Yes.
And just what amount of DNA do you get from your
What?
parents?
You get 50% from your fathers and 50% from your mother.
What?
And here you
Who knew?
reach some sort of qualifiers to your conclusion, very strong support, uninformative, moderate support, things of that sort.
Yes.
Okay, let's start at the top. For Mr. Bart Halderson, related to the staining on where the tape was inside the garbage bin,
You fucked up time to find
what
out
was
you
your
were
conclusion?
adopted.
That it was at least 43 billion times more likely to observe this DNA profile as a mixture from H1, which is person of interest plus unknown, than if it's a mixture resulting from H2, which is from 2 unknown individuals.
and Krista, it's uninformative,
Yes.
meaning,
I'm not making any type of conclusions on if they're included or excluded based on the statistic calculated.
and for Mitchell Halderson, it's indicated as moderate support for inclusion.
Yes.
And explain again, if you could, what moderate support for inclusion means.
The moderate support for inclusion was developed when we did our validation, and it was determined that it was a support for inclusion, but it was just above our cutoff for
What is that cutoff?
1,000.
And what is Mitchell?
2,670 times more likely.
Compared to where you find very strong support with Bart, it was 43 billion times more likely.
Yes.
Okay. And lastly, for Chandler Halderson, you wrote uninformative.
Yes.
All right. Here, now we're talking
tell
about
me
the
if it
scissors.
matches
And we'll do the same process as
or
we're talking
it
through. We'll have the detective glove up.
And where you found it. If you can't do that, don't know what you're here for.
And first, I'll have to show you the box where I'm talking about item D1.
I am quite bored with this.
For the jury's purpose, that's been
Yes.
marked as exhibit number 142 in our case. Is that the item labeled scissors that I think you previously talked about some of the blood you found?
Yes.
All right, we'll go ahead and have the detective display those for the jury. And I'll ask you some questions. Same 4 possible persons of interest in using star mix, and what were your results here?
The swabbing from the handles of the scissors, I detected a 2-person mixture with at least 1 male.
And did you reach some conclusions regarding those persons of interest?
Bart Halderson
In my way.
was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe the profile if it is a mixture of H1 than it is a mixture of H2.
Okay. And Krista Halderson,
The same result.
at least 1 quadrillion more likely to observe that profile than unknown person.
Yes.
The number quadrillion is a large number.
Yes.
How large of a number is that?
It's a 1 with 15 zeros after it.
Here, Mitchell.
It's a
Chandler
1 with
excluded.
15 zeros.
Yes.
We don't
Thank
need
you.
to display it again, but here, obviously, there was some
For
additional
that.
staining on the scissors, item D2.
Yes, I took swabbings from the staining on the blade of the scissors.
And Jerry already saw that with the scissors, but what were your conclusions or reached here?
It was a 2-person mixture with at least 1 male. Again, Bart Halderson was at least
So 1 with
1 quadrillion
15
times more
zeros.
likely to observe this DNA profile as a mixture of H1 than if it is H2. Krista Halderson, it was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile as a mixture resulting from H1 than if it is a mixture resulting from H2. Mitchell Halderson was excluded and Chandler Halderson was excluded.
Okay. Next item we're going to talk about, and we'll have the detective assist us, is your item E1 for purposes of the jury. We're talking about item or exhibit 141, which is the broken saw blade. I believe testimony was reportedly recovered from the Irwin Road property. So we'll have the detective just pull that out as we discuss it.
Yes.
And you were answering the question, is that in fact the item E1 from the lab?
Yes.
Okay, we'll have the detective remove it. And as he carefully does that, tell me about your conclusions using the star mix here.
So I detected a partial low-level 2-person mixture with at least 1 male. Bart Halderson, the result was very strong support for inclusion, and it was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe the DNA profile as a mixture resulting from H1 than if it's a mixture resulting from H2.
And then Krista, Mitchell, and Chandler were uninformative.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Next, we're going to talk about the all-way handsaw. I think you labeled it item F, so Frank, and then sub-designated F1 was the swabbing you took.
Yes.
Okay, and for everyone's purposes, that's exhibit 140. I'm sorry for the delay. Obviously, the detective wants to change his gloves each time, but we'll have him show you exhibit number 140 for our purposes. Is that item F for your purposes?
Yes.
Okay. And we'll have the detective open that up, display it to the jury. And while you describe the results, what were your results on item F1?
I detected a 2-person mixture with at least 1 male. Bart Halderson had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it's a mixture resulting from H1 than resulting from H2. Krista Halderson, it was very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe the DNA profile as a mixture from H1 than from H2. And Mitchell Halderson and Chandler Halderson were excluded.
Next, of course, the detective will go through the process of changing gloves. We're going to talk about item G in this case, which is the pruning
that
shears
means Mom and
for the
Dad
jury's purposes.
blood was
Exhibit number
off. Was off.
139.
Wonder
were
why.
recovered from the Irwin Road property.
Oh, yeah,
And it was the
'cause he
testimony.
chopped him
We'll have
up.
the detective. One second. And we'll have the detective continue to show him, but we're going to start talking about the results because there's numerous results as to this one. Tell us about item G1.
Did we DNA test the handle?
G1 was the swapping of the black rubber handle on the pruning shears. I detected a
Oh.
2-person mixture with at least 1 male. And the results for each individual was Bart Halderson had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it was a mixture from H1 than if it was a mixture resulting from H2. Krista Halderson had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from H1 than
Handles?
if it's a mixture resulting from H2. Mitchell Halderson was excluded and Chandler Halderson was excluded.
Okay, briefly, the detective's going to open the box. I know we've all seen it before, but I just want to make sure everyone's seeing the same thing. That's your item that we're talking about?
Yes.
All right, we'll go to the other swabbing you took from there, which was G2. What did you find here?
Again, it was a swabbing of the staining on the red metal handle portion of the pruning shears. It was a 2-person mixture and at least 1 male. Bart Halderson had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from H1 than if it is a mixture resulting from H2. Krista Halderson had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from H1 than if it's a mixture resulting from H2. Mitchell Halderson was excluded and Chandler Halderson was excluded.
Excellent. And the detective will repackage that and you can take a seat for a second. Next, we're going to talk about this item, I think being referred to as the barn tarp, item S1 that you previously looked at. You performed this work on this item, on the stainings on the barn tarp. What were you able to conclude?
The swab from the stain on the barn tarp was a 2-person mixture and at least 1 male.
Barn tarp.
Bart Halderson had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it was a mixture from H1 than if it's a mixture resulting from H2. Krista Halderson had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it was a mixture resulting from H1 than if it's a mixture resulting from H2. Mitchell Halderson was excluded and Chandler Halderson was excluded.
Okay. And we don't have to read it again, but you did another swab from the same tarp, correct?
Yes,
And that has identical results.
yes,
Bart and Krista, each 1 quadrillion times more likely to be observed than anyone else. There's a random person.
it was at least
So long
1
story
quadrillion times
short,
more likely to observe the DNA
Their
profile if it was a
DNA is on
mixture
all of the
resulting
things.
from H1 than H2.
You then performed another report in this case. So that's exhibit number 418, correct?
Yes.
I'll hand you that report.
Where's
for reference.
Chandlers?
Same format. You examined a lot of items.
Yes.
However,
Jesus.
many of these are swabs, correct, that we're looking at here?
I'd say half are swabs. The other half were bags labeled.
Okay. First thing in your report is items you identified blood on.
Yes.
Let's talk about those briefly. There's items starting with the letter W labeled paper towels. What were those?
Paper towels.
Yeah, and do you have a description in general for item W, of what that was?
There was a box containing several bags of what were called
Bags.
that contained paper towels.
Okay, and you were able to identify blood on that?
On 4 of them I tested.
Okay.
There was blood.
Next, we have a swab reportedly recovered from a family room, swab G, family room. And these items labeled G by the investigators that were involved in the
Merry
case.
Christmas.
Yes.
And you sub-designated that or designated as X6.
Yes, there were 7 or 8 swabs in that one item submitted.
Next, you were able to identify blood on the X, item AC.
Yes.
Okay, and this one we'll actually want to look at. So I'll have the detective come up. He can grab that. I'll actually move some of this out of
Blood
the way.
cannot be something from the living room swabs.
I'm gonna have the detective show you item AC, and you can just let us know, in fact, is that have the stickers from your
I don't know
lab
what's on the
labeled
X.
as that item. You can take a look at that if you need to get up, that's fine.
Please don't.
It has our label M211575 AC on the box.
Sure. And we'll pause on opening that until we
But
get
the
to the
X.
section and talk about the actual findings. But where on that item were you able to locate blood?
Do you mind if I refer to my notes?
Absolutely fine, thank you.
I did the testing to confirm for blood on the staining near the hilt of the axe.
Okay. How would you describe where the hilt is?
It's where the axe head and the handle meet.
Okay. Next, some shoes recovered in this case. You labeled as items AD1 and AD2. You found blood on those shoes.
Yes,
Can you tell us whereabouts on those shoes you found blood?
the bottoms of the shoes.
And I'll have the detective just show you what's been marked and received in this case. If you could look and see if your lab sticker is in fact on that.
Yes, it is.
There were some jeans or pants that you labeled as AE and you recovered blood there.
Yes.
What is the difference between blood identified in this report and this next section, which we hadn't seen before, which is presumptive testing for blood positive, however, cannot be confirmed?
So presumptive testing for blood is what a lot of people are familiar with. It's the chemical test. And if blood is indicated, it will turn pink. And then I went to do the confirmatory test for blood, and I did not see 2 lines. I only had 1 line. So I could say that it was presumptive for blood was positive, but I could not confirm blood on those items.
Okay. And those items were a swab from the living room fireplace and a swab from the Southside basement area?
Yes.
And then what does the next section mean, just presumptive testing for blood positive? And what's different from the blood was identified section?
So presumptive testing for blood was positive on the paper towels and the swabs listed, but I didn't take those on to do a confirmatory test. I took a representative sampling to confirm for blood. And the rest of these items just had the presumptive testing done.
We're going to mark an exhibit if you have the sticker. And those items, paper towels, swab from the family room. There were some swabs from the fireplace and Southside basement area.
Yes.
Okay. Same as before. You prepared the items for analysis, meaning you swabbed them or did the cuttings, and you did some analysis. Here, the first couple are unsuitable. Again, remind us what that means.
Just means I didn't detect any DNA, so I couldn't go on.
And deal with these.
Yes.
Tell me you found DNA on the axe.
Let's start with this one. A swab from the living room, or the family room, excuse me, item X1A, and the swabbing from the stain on the sole of the shoe that you had, item AD2B. Tell me what your conclusions were here.
They were single source male profiles from the same individual, and Bart Halderson was the source of those profiles.
For the jury's purpose, some of the swabs we're talking about here
We don't
came
need
from
to see the
fireplace.
swabs.
The investigator Leatherberry
We
testified.
don't need to see
to
any
some
of
those.
that.
But here, we're talking about
We've already seen
shoe
it.
and a swabbing from the family room. And you identified Mr. Halderson?
Very
Yes.
underwhelming.
Same numerical value as you previously talked about, 1 in 7 trillion.
Yes.
The one
Swab from the family room, item X2
15
through
zeros.
X7. And cuttings from the stain on the jeans, item 82 and 83. You were able to observe, or you were able to determine a single source male profile. Tell me those results.
Detected a single source male profile from the same individual. Chandler M. Halderson was the source of those profiles.
on what?
And you used the phrase
Stains on
family
the
room.
jeans.
Were you aware that that was the designation being used by the investigators in certain areas of the home? They were calling their basement their family room, things of that sort?
Yes, whatever they had written on the transmittal is what we used for our description.
Next, we'll talk about swabbed from the north side of the basement, items Y1A, Y3A, Y5A, and Y6A. Here, these were swabs taken from the same general area. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And did you perform some analysis on them?
Yes, I was able to detect single source female profiles from the same individual, and Krista Halderson was the source of those profiles.
Were you able to perform blood testing on that swab?
On those swabs?
Yes.
No, I did not perform blood testing on those swabs.
Can you tell us why not?
There wasn't very much staining on those items when I examined them. And I talked to Detective Leatherberry about whether they wanted blood identified or to go on for DNA analysis. And for a conversation with him, he said he had done some blood testing on one of the items. And then the other ones I would just do DNA analysis on.
And were these, were you aware they were swabs of blood pattern that was on a safe in the basement?
I knew they were from a safe, but I didn't know what they were of.
And did you rely on Mr. Leatherberry's representations then, or at least in determining whether DNA was more important at that time? Is that how you made your decision?
Yes.
Calm down, gooey eye.
Next, talk about the swab from the living room fireplace, item N. And so for the jury's purposes, I suppose I put it up there. Item N being maybe in the center. Item N, what are we looking at there for result?
I had a partial low-level male profile detected.
So dramatic.
And when comparing the standards, Chandler Halderson was the source of that profile.
On what? God dang it. Missed it.
Next, we'll talk about the south side basement area. I believe it was labeled F by some of the investigators involved there. What were you able to determine?
I detected a partial low-level 3-person mixture, but this profile was unsuitable for comparisons due to the limited amount of genetic information and the complexity of the mixture.
Now we're going to look at some star mix results again.
Yes.
Okay. Here, talking about living room fireplace, item O. And what were you able to determine based on swabbing from item O?
I detected a partial low-level 3-person mixture in at least one male. Bart Halderson had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it was a mixture from Bart Halderson and 2 unknown individuals, or H1, than if it was a mixture resulting from 3 unknown individuals, or H2. Krista Halderson had strong support for inclusion. It was at least 10,000 times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it was a mixture resulting from H1 than if it was a mixture resulting from H2. Mitchell Halderson was uninformative, and it was 2,940 times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it was a mixture from Chandler Halderson and 2 unknown individuals than if it was a mixture resulting from 3 unknown individuals, which is a moderate support for inclusion.
I don't understand.
Now we're going to talk about the swab. I think
What
Leatherberry
none of
testified
that
yesterday,
means.
area G that he was able to identify. You did star mix on it. What were your conclusions?
I detected a
Speak.
partial low-level 2-person mixture that
Any
contained
of
at least
this.
1 male. Bart Halderson had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile was a mixture resulting from H1 than if it was a mixture resulting from H2. Krista Halderson was uninformative. It was at least 1,280 times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it was a mixture resulting from H1 than a mixture resulting from H2, which was a moderate support for inclusion, and Chandler Halderson was uninformative.
Next, and we'll get the item out again, just so we're looking at the same thing. Swabbing on the staining of the axe head. I think you testified previously to various areas of the axe head that were tested, but let's start with this one, item AC1. So when you swabbed near the axe head, tell us what your results were.
I did a 2-person mixture that it contained at least 1 male. Bart Halderson had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it was a mixture resulting from H1 than if it was a mixture resulting from H2. Krista Halderson also had very strong support for inclusion. It was at least 106 million times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it was a mixture resulting from H1 than if it was a mixture resulting from H2. Mitchell Halderson had moderate support for exclusion. It was 2,600 times more likely to observe this mixture if it was resulting from H2 than if it was a mixture resulting from H1. And Chandler Halderson was uninformative.
AC2, near the hilts of the axe handle. Is this where you said you were able to detect blood?
I identified blood, yes.
Could you point for the jury, I know we described it previously, without touching it, the detectives holding the axe, where is in fact the area in which you were able to identify blood?
There's a silver circle near where the axe head and the handle meet, and that's where I swabbed.
And I'll have the detective place it back. As we're talking about this result, AC2, I know you've been reading a lot. But there you found a 2-person mixture with at least 1 male, and then you reached some conclusions. That is for Bart Halderson, very strong support for inclusion.
Yes,
Krista Halderson, very strong support for inclusion.
yes,
And you excluded both Mitchell and Chandler.
yes,
You then swabbed the top part of the X, item AC3. There you reached conclusions. Very strong support for inclusion for Bart,
yes,
very strong support for Krista,
yes,
and you excluded both Mitchell and Chandler.
yes.
Next, we're going to talk about a pair of shoes. And I'll have the detective, if you could, in a second, walk up with a pair of shoes. In fact, they're already up there. Here in this case, you were asked to identify or to examine a pair of Brooks shoes that were brought to the crime lab.
Yes,
And are you aware that other disciplines at the crime lab, people who do footwear testing and things like that, so they were also involved?
yes,
Just might be a good break or a good time to ask you. A lot of different disciplines work together at the crime lab.
yes,
Fingerprints, footwear analysis, trace evidence, DNA, things like that.
yes.
How do you decide what order things are tested when they come in? We plop this on your desk one day. Who goes first?
It depends on what the question is being asked of us to find. Some cases, if there's biological staining, we'll take our samples first, because sometimes the process for latent prints could destroy any DNA that we may want to do in the future. Sometimes items, depending on what they are best suited for latent prints to examine first, and then DNA. It's just a discussion between the assigned analyst on what the best, what is best to do first.
Okay. In this case, you were asked to swab the inside of the shoes near the heel, or that's what you decided to do. Why would one swab the inside of the shoes?
You might want to know who was wearing them.
Here, we're looking at the left Brooks shoe in that bag that's in front of you. We don't have to do anything with it right now. It's there. There, you reach some results, and that is uninformative for Bart, very strong support for inclusion for Krista, and uninformative for Mitchell, but very strong support for Chandler.
Yes, it was a 4-person mixture and that had at least 1 male.
And you examined the other shoe as well, right?
Yes,
Skip ahead 2. Here's the right shoe, and there, very strong support for exclusion for Bart. You exclude Krista. You very strong support for exclusion of Mitchell, but very strong support for inclusion of Chandler.
yes,
Meaning Mr. Halderson, Mr. Chandler Halderson is the only one with the left and right shoe that had strong support for inclusion of some sort.
yes,
There was a stain you
Weird.
previously testified about on the bottom of those shoes. You labeled it sub-designation AD1B. Your conclusions there for the staining on the bottom of the shoes. Bart Halderson, strong support for inclusion.
yes,
Krista Halderson, very strong support for inclusion.
yes,
Mitchell Halderson, moderate support for exclusion.
yes,
And Chandler Halderson, moderate support for inclusion.
yes,
Was that the stain that you previously testified was blood?
yes,
This perhaps hasn't come into the case, but you were provided and we're just going to present everything. You were provided a pair of jeans at some, and that is a pair of jeans, AG1, and you found very strong support for inclusion of Chandler, and you excluded everybody else.
yes.
Your last report that you did was much shorter, I would imagine, than all of the other reports. Showing you report number 560. When was this report dated?
November 8th, 2021.
And it's fair to say the police at some point found a gun and they brought it out to you to see if there was any DNA on it.
Yes.
And were you able to find any?
I took 3 swabbings from the rifle, and the results had very limited human DNA, limited male DNA, which means it was unsuitable for further analysis.
Okay. You couldn't draw any conclusions from it.
Right.
Are guns a difficult object to detect DNA on sometimes?
They can be, yes.
Do you examine guns often in your job?
Yes.
And are you always able to extract DNA from somewhere on that gun when you sample it?
No.
If you want to drink of water now, might be a good time. I'm going to ask a couple questions of everyone, but we might be getting close to the end. Okay.
Okay.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Cross-examination?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. So a couple questions for you. Earlier, Mr. Brown mentioned something about the crime lab being able to only test a limited amount of items. Is that correct?
We can accept more, but usually we like a heads up first.
Okay. So I think the number 10 was used. Is that just a typical number that's assigned to homicide cases?
Yes,
And the state can certainly ask for more than 10 items to be tested.
yes,
They're not limited in the amount of items. In other words, no more than 20 items can be tested, correct?
we just like to limit it just so it doesn't become very overwhelming. They can certainly ask for more to be submitted.
Of course, and that makes sense. Now, we talked a lot about DNA in general and blood. So if I hold this pen and you swab it, my DNA is going to be on this pen, correct?
Potentially, yes.
And there's no blood, just take my word for it. There's no blood on this pen. So you're still going to be able to pick up some DNA on that, correct?
Potentially, yes.
And that's why, and please correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes when we're designating or when the crime lab was designating swabs, there was just a general swab of blah versus swab of staining of blah. Does that sound about right?
Right.
So is it fair to assume that if there was a staining in front of that swab or in that swab, that's testing for DNA of the staining in particular? Yes?
Potentially, yes.
And if it just said the general swab, then that would be just general swabbing, no blood detected or no blood necessary. Yes?
Potentially, yes.
And just to give you a better example, let's see. If you want to look at your September 1st report, and I'm looking at, does the bottom have bait stamps for you?
Do you have the page number?
Yeah, I'm looking at 2,903.
Exhibit 417.
Yes, thank you, Judge.
2903, you said?
Yep. So right in the middle of that page, it says swabbing of handles of scissors, correct?
Yes,
And then right below that, it says swabbing of staining on blades on scissors, correct?
yes,
So the first one, is it safe to assume that it's just a general swab of the handles?
yes, trying to avoid any type of staining seen on the handle.
And the second one is more specific to staining seen on that particular item.
On the blade, yes.
And then while we're looking at that sample of the handles in general, Mr. Halderson was excluded. And by Mr. Halderson, I mean Chandler was excluded.
Yes,
Now let's talk about the standards used. And when I say standards, I'm talking about the individuals that were compared to that sample, correct? So as far as standards given, it sounds like there were just 4 samples or 4 standards that the crime lab used, correct?
those were what were submitted to the lab, yes.
So if there were any other standards,
Those
any
are the
other
4
individuals
people
that were
that lived in that
trying to get
house.
comparison from items, those would have been provided in your report, correct?
Yes, results would have been given.
Judge, can we approach? Sure.
I'm not gonna lie, they should have tested the girlfriend though. But here we are. I spilled my soda. I don't really spill it, it exploded. Sorry if that was loud. Can't hear anything. Are you guys talking? You're talking. Can't hear you. I don't think they turned the volume back up. I'm pretty sure they're talking. That's okay. Cross-examination doesn't mean anything with these people. They don't ever have anything worth listening to. But this could be the one time they got a real banger. But I doubt it. So, you never know. Because their sidebars don't last that long.
Of how DNA wouldn't be
Oh,
left on an item.
here
For
we go.
instance, if I, Ms. Mayor, used the example of a pen, if I touched a pen and it was swabbed, what could cause
Oh,
DNA to come
shit.
off of a pen?
If someone was wearing a glove, if they had wiped the item down after touching it,
Do cleaning products have any impact on DNA?
potentially, yes.
In your work, are you able to tell particularly how DNA, when you find no DNA, are you able to say why or why not it wasn't there?
No,
It could be wiped off,
yes,
it could be cleaning products,
yes,
or it could have never been there in the first place.
correct,
You are a scientist and your results are limited to those reports?
yes.
No further questions.
May this witness be excused.
Excused but not released. Yes,
Excused but not released.
and I think we will.
You take your reports, but I'll take the paper exhibits that you have and look at everything else cleared up in a little bit. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day. And did you say you wish to proceed with some additional testimony from one of the case detectives?
Yes.
I think we'll go, ladies and gentlemen, without a break, but we'll be breaking a little bit earlier for the day as a result, if that's all right. Unless anybody needs a time or a moment, then we can go forward. Go right ahead.
I'm going to call for limited purpose Detective Sabrina Sims. HDMI over here.
Oh,
Until we're ready.
Oh, no, turn that now to the H.
No. Just turn it off until we're
Turn
ready.
it off. Okay, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just didn't want it to see you.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Is your name still Sabrina Sims?
Yes, it is.
And you are one of the two case detectives in this case.
Yes, I am.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the different areas that were searched by police in connection to this case. Of course, one place that was searched was the Irwin Road address in Cottage Grove, Dane County, Wisconsin.
Yes,
And that was searched primarily because a human torso was found on the land.
that's correct.
And we've also talked with Greg Leatherberry and others. The 4595 Oak Springs Circle address in Windsor, Dane County, Wisconsin was also searched by police.
Yes,
And that's primarily because of information that came out of seeing Chandler Halderson as being the person that was seen close to where the torso was. So you were looking for a crime scene.
that's correct.
Okay. I'm going to show you what has been marked
that was a strange question.
as exhibits
Question.
459 through 465. If you would look at exhibits 459 through 465. And as a group, would you describe those exhibits as photographs of other locations searched by the Dane County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, I would.
I would move exhibits 459 through 465 into evidence at this time.
No objection.
They are received.
And I would ask to publish.
You may publish.
And I will take the HDMI now.
Please.
Is the podium in your way as far as sight lines to the witness?
No,
Oh,
it's fine
okay.
for me.
I couldn't tell from my angle. Thank you, Attorney Brown.
I think it's connected if it's turned, is it turned on?
Thank you.
Okay.
There's the pond. There's the lake.
Detective Sims, What does exhibit 459 show?
This is a drone image of the backyard of the Halderson home, overlooking the pond area directly behind the Halderson home.
And was this pond area searched?
Yes, it was.
Tell me about that. How
Ooh, what'd you find?
did the
What'd you
Dane County
find?
Sheriff's Office search the pond?
It was definitely done with a lot of thought, with cooperation with the pond owner, all of the residents that lived on the pond. We had to get consent from all of them. Obviously, we've taken in consideration the wildlife and fish around the pond. We didn't want to disturb that as part of our decision making. We searched the pond because of the proximity to the residents, being directly behind the residents. At the point the decision was made to search the pond, we were still looking for numerous items of evidence. If you can see in this photograph, I guess it would be on the right side, that is our dive team truck. We had our dive team assist in part of the search. So they obviously got into the water. They also had difficulty in the search because, as you can see, there's numerous weeds growing in the pond. So as the search started, some of the divers who are Dane County deputy sheriffs, they just were struggling with the environment and the weeds below the water. So a decision was made in cooperation again with the pond owner. And we also used Dane County Parks to assist in cutting weeds out of the park or out of the pond. So we brought in a weed cutter and methodically cut weeds out so that the divers would have an easier time searching the area to try to get to the bottom of the pond.
Did the team also search all the weeds that they cut to make sure no items of evidence were missed?
Yes, we did. That happened over 2 days, actually. The weeds were cut, taken on a conveyor belt, transported to the Dane County Law Enforcement Training Center, laid out in different batches, and searched by hand, and also a cadaver canine ran around the different piles of weeds as well.
Showing you what's been marked as exhibit 460. Is this just a different view of the pond?
Yes, it is.
And that's after some of the water has been drained. Is that fair?
That is fair to say. I should backtrack. The decision initially was to drain the pond to assist the divers. As is with any plan, sometimes it changes because as the water was decreasing in the pond, it actually made it more difficult for the divers. So at that point, the decision was made to cut the weeds.
Did it become more difficult because of the mud?
Yes, the bottom, from what I was told, it was, there was a lot of silt at the bottom. The divers were kind of getting stuck, as they were trying to get to the bottom, feeling by hand, but also, with their feet.
And at the end of the day, was anything of evidentiary value located in the pond?
No, it was not.
Well, that was a
I'm
waste
gonna show
of
you what's
time.
already been received as exhibit 532. This is the Snapchat that the girlfriend Kat Melander took of Chandler at the Roxbury location. Did that lead to a search?
Yes, it did.
And that's the search that we've heard previously about where the legs of
That
Mrs.
found
Halderson were
Mom.
collected.
Yes.
We heard
And she only did
Greg
that
Leatherberry yesterday
because
talk about how the trash can tested positive for blood. Based on that information,
she
what, if
didn't know
any,
where he
searches did
was.
Dane
And he was
County
supposed to be at
Sheriff's Office
home.
So
Doing
we actually had
something,
talked about the
and
red
he
staining
wasn't,
that
so she
W.
was checking up
Leatherberry
on him.
observed on the garbage can, and his plan was to test that staining, and if it tested positive for blood and then human blood, we had made the decision that we were going to search a landfill. So we had a detective, I guess basically follow from where the truck picked up the trash at the Windsor residence, where that trash went, which ultimately was a transfer point, and it ended up in a landfill in Jefferson County, a waste management landfill. We also had confirmation that the trash went out on Monday, July 5th, 2021. And we had that information because we know the route, but also because of the surveillance video that we got from 111 Oak Springs. So we actually saw the garbage can and the recycle bin wheeled to the curb by Chandler. So based on the time frame from when the garbage went out to when we had started our investigation, we felt that it was necessary to search the landfill, knowing that that task would be, very, very challenging. Something that, in my experience as a detective, or actually as the Sheriff's Office for Dane County, we have never done.
And I'm showing you exhibit 461. What in the world is exhibit 461?
Again, this is a drone image of the landfill. It's the Deer Track landfill in Watertown, which is in Jefferson County. This was taken as part of our like recon of the area. This was the area that Detective Mayor Hoffer had worked with the landfill management and determined that this was the cell area where we believed that the trash from the Halderson residence ended up.
Okay. And Exhibit 462, how would you describe Exhibit 462?
Again, this is just a drone image overlooking the area. You can see, I guess, to the far left of the screen, that is Interstate 94. And then kind of directly in the center of the screen towards the bottom is the specific cell or trash area we were going to be searching.
Exhibit 463. Could you
Uh,
please describe that for the
Yes,
jury?
463 is,
The landfill.
I guess, as the process was going, this was taken, as you can see, there's plastic
Oh my
bags
God,
all over the
excuse
place.
me.
There's wood.
That just
There's
snuck
actually an
up on me.
individual standing
I had no
pretty much in the
idea.
center,
I apologize.
upper center of the picture. He's wearing a yellow shirt and blue hard hat. He's standing basically in the cell area that they searched. The cell area, if I remember right, I want to say it was 50 feet wide by 50 feet. 50 feet wide by 50 feet, and then like 10 feet deep. It was a total of 20,000 cubic feet that they searched.
And was it basically they went piece by piece?
They did. Again, that was, you know, meetings we had to logistically plan how to do that safely because of the environment you're going in, the safety equipment that was needed. We actually, deputies that worked at the landfill for the 2 weeks that we did that had to take an OSHA training before participating in the search. And that was done with, you know, the best safety measures we could over the time period that we were there.
Exhibit 464.
464 is yet another image of the individual standing, more for just for reference to determine like how deep the trash is. The individual standing there
Look how much
is
trash.
approximately 5 feet
There's
9.
trash.
Just for like a reference point of what you're looking at. Again, he's standing in the center of compacted
And
trash.
you know, all this
The
could be
trash is
avoided if
compacted
that little
numerous times.
shithead
It's smashed from the time it gets
would just
taken from the curb in
fucking
the truck
say what he
to the
did.
transfer point. It's actually
Like,
ran
bro,
over.
you wasted all these people's
with,
time.
it's almost like spikes smashed down to try to obviously tear it apart,
Like,
smash it,
wasted all these
which made it very
people's
difficult to
time.
search. You can see the torn pieces of paper, plastic, items you really can't even make out.
You're a piece of
within this image.
shit, bro.
And then finally, Exhibit 465,
This is
another
just,
picture of the,
There are people
The dump
digging
search.
through trash.
this is just a
Didn't
close-up.
even know
again,
your
just,
mom and dad, and
showing,
you
trying to show
fucking
like
killed
the,
them.
trying to show the depth of the trash that was being searched.
now did
That's
the search team come
fucking
across any
insane.
items of blood?
They did.
And did those end up being of any evidentiary value?
No, they did not. I should say that we were working in conjunction with the medical examiner's office and the forensic anthropologist, Dr. Christina Figueroa Soto, as well, in case we did come across anything. There were some bones that were found. None of those determined to be human bone. You know, there was medical waste, bags of blood, stuff like that.
And about how many
shouldn't
people
go
were
to
involved in that search?
landfills. I don't guess.
I would say each day, it was approximately 10 to 12 people for a total of 10 days, that same amount each day.
Okay, and did you receive any tips from citizens throughout this investigation?
We did.
About how many of those would you estimate?
I would say between 30 and 40.
And was each tip followed up on?
Yes.
Did one of those tips result in a search of the Lord of Love Church
Yes,
in
it did.
Windsor, Wisconsin?
Yes, it did.
How long would, and can you just tell me about that property and how it was searched?
Yep. So that tip came in, I want to say 2 weeks into the investigation. I want to say it was July 17th that we actually searched that area. The church itself is located south of the Halderson home, so in close distance-wise to the home. So we put a search team together based on the information from the tipster that there was an odor coming from some of the grass property that was behind the church. There's also like a walkway around that area. Ultimately, it was determined there was actually some sewer work being done in that area. We did search it with a large search team, a cadaver canine, and ultimately located nothing.
Did you guys also search the town of Burke Park, which is right outside of Sun Prairie, Wisconsin?
Yes, we did.
Why did you search that area?
Throughout the investigation, we were talking to numerous witnesses, people that knew Chandler Halderson. We had received information from some of the people that we interviewed that it was a park that Mr. Halderson or Chandler would frequent or had been to in the past. It's a very rural park. There's a waterway there. There's a bridge and a large field you can walk across. So we thought using our resources on the same day of the Lord of Love search, we would search the town of Burke Park to determine if we could find any evidence there, and ultimately we did not.
Was the Pine Island Wildlife Area in Portage, Wisconsin searched?
Yes, it was.
Why was that area searched?
At that point in the investigation, when we decided to search that area, we had received cell phone records from Chandler's cell phone. So this had been weeks into the investigation. We worked with an analyst who mapped his cell phone records, and we had determined that there was a trip to the Pine Island Wildlife Area, which is in Columbia County, which is an area that is along the Wisconsin River. Chandler was out there late in the evening, between 10:30 and 11 at night. His cell phone was in that area for several minutes, and we just thought, based on all of the information we had so far in our investigation, how we had found at this point Krista Halderson's legs at the Wisconsin River in Roxbury, we thought we needed to search that area up in Portage as well.
And does that area run along the Wisconsin River?
It does.
And did you have your dive team out to that location?
Yes, we did. We actually conducted a search over a couple of different days. Just the landscape overall is challenging. There's bogs and different waterways. The area in which we searched, it was right along Levee Road, which is a levee that butts up to the Wisconsin River. That river itself, the water level fluctuates quite a bit, and it also has a strong current. So we had searched it on foot with search teams one day, and ultimately deciding that we would try and put our divers into the water after a cadaver canine had alerted along the banks of one of the search areas. The Dane County Sheriff's Office dive team did go out there one day, also with the DNR and Columbia County Sheriff's Office. And one of our divers did get in the water, and immediately upon getting in the water, it was realized that it was very dangerous. It was something that our dive team had not done before in the Wisconsin River due to the current and just how strong the current was. It was such a dangerous situation that we basically pulled him back into the boat and did no more searching there.
But you mentioned a cadaver dog did alert along the shore.
Yes, we utilized a couple of different officers that have cadaver canines that are employed at the City of Madison Police Department, and we did a mutual aid request for their assistance.
No further questions at this time.
Cross-examination.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much, Detective.
Oh my God.
All right, ladies and
thank
gentlemen,
you.
we are at a point.
And no, thank you. Oh my God. Well, that's the end of that one. Actually, I'm gonna put this back up here and see what is left. Oh, get over here. So we did all of that one. We've got the other one and the other one. That's not right, because I think this was all of it. I think it was just all broke down. These are all just the ones that were broke down. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my God, I don't have a day 7. Do we not have a day 7? That can't be. Oh my God, y'all. I gotta figure this stuff out. 'Cause none of this. I'm pretty sure this is what we've already watched. And they just broke it down into pieces. Yes. So that was it. That was the day. Play.
Thank you.
What'd
Variance
you say?
and perhaps some of your education as well.
It is.
I'll move 307 into evidence.
No objection.
It is received.
Did we watch this?
In
guy?
this specific case, at some point were you asked to become involved regarding a video of
Yeah.
some
Good God,
homeowner
yes.
named Colin Lynch who lived on
Shush.
Brigham Road, perhaps behind the house?
Shush. Okay. Yes, we did. That was all of the thing that we watched. Okay. Whatever. Okay. So that's it. That's day 6. That's the end of day 6. We're done. Finito. Day 6 is over with. Now I have to. There's no day 7. Do we just forget about day 7? There's day 8, day 9. Day 8. Did they just like miscount days? Weird. We're almost done then. So that means we only have like barely anything left. Huh. Interesting. Or okay, well, I thought this was the one that they had. So let me go back. Okay, but I won't do it with you guys just sitting here watching. Okay, so that was that. That was that. That was that. Day 6. So found some DNA. We found some things. A lot of boring things. DNA gets into that 1 trillion, billion, quadrillion crap, and then I get all confused and don't know what's happening. So then I zone out. So I apologize if that was interesting to anybody because it wasn't to me. I don't really know. I know there was DNA found. Don't really know whose it was and what it was and where it was because this is where I wouldn't be a good juror because I'd be like, huh? I missed that because I zoned out. I wasn't paying attention. The axe had both. I mean, the majority of it, that it was just all the mom and dad. It had the mom and dad's DNA on it. So I think that was the main focus that I was looking for. But it's odd. I'm stuck in my throat. But it's odd that like the handles and things didn't have Chandler's. But then the defense went ahead and pointed that out, that even if I touch this, doesn't necessarily mean that my DNA is going to be on it. Now, does it? So I could have touched this. I could have used the saw and not left my DNA. Or I could have wiped it off. Correct? Correct. So just because his DNA is not on it, the defense brought that up. The defense pointed that out. So good on you, bro. Your client's DNA wasn't found on some things. But that could be because, he wiped it off. Or, it just wasn't there. So, good catch. Good catch. I wonder if they'll bring the girlfriend back on. Oh, like, give me something else. Like, give me some fire. Well, don't give me fire. Like, that was poor choice. Poor choice of words, I guess. But can we? Okay. All right. Well, we'll move on to day 7. Moving right along. See you in the next one. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Do all that. Just like it. Just like it. And watch it. That's all I need you to do. And subscribe. Get my subscribers up. Please and thank you. Later.